Welcome, dear dreamer, to Whispered Legends, a sanctuary where ancient voices echo like wind through bamboo, and stories bloom beneath the moonlight. Let the world soften, let your breath slow, and let your spirit drift across quiet mountaintops, misted gardens, and lantern-lit paths that wind through time. Tonight, we journey to the storied heart of Japan, where mountains wear veils of cloud, and spirits walk beside mortals in the hush of twilight. These are tales told in tea houses and temples, along riverbanks, and in the flicker of firelight. Some are tender, of cranes and snails, of one-inch heroes, and enchanted kettles. Others whisper of longing, of love that lingers like incense, of fox brides, haunted lanterns, and the slow unraveling of forgotten promises. But all of them carry the hush of the seasons, the stillness of falling petals, and the timeless pull of wonder. So settle in, dear listener. Rest beneath the cherry-blossomed sky, and let these stories of Japan unfold, one by one. Story 1, Momotarō, Peach Boy. From the Okayama Prefecture, Japan. Once upon a time, in a quiet village nestled between green hills and soft rivers, there lived an old man and an old woman. They had no children, and though their home was small and their days were simple, they worked hard and lived kindly. Each morning, the old man would go into the hills to cut grasses and gather firewood, while the old woman would walk down to the river to wash clothes. One gentle morning, the old woman knelt by the riverbank, humming a quiet tune as she scrubbed cloth upon the stones. As she wrung out a garment and looked downstream, something strange caught her eye. A peach, round and golden, floating down the current as if it had been sent from the heavens. Startled by its size, she waded into the shallows and pulled it ashore. "My, what a peach!" she exclaimed. "So big and perfect, surely a gift of the gods." She called out to her husband, who soon came trotting down the path. Together they carried the peach home, planning to eat it together for supper. But just as the old man lifted a knife to cut it, the peach gave a great shake and split open. And from within it stepped a small boy, healthy and smiling, his eyes bright with kindness. "Please, don't be afraid," the boy said. "I was sent from the heavens to be your son." The old man and woman fell to their knees, their eyes brimming with tears. They named him Momotarō, Peach Boy. They raised him with love and care. By the age of 15, Momotarō was stronger and wiser than any other youth. One evening, as the fire crackled, Momotarō spoke. "Father, Mother, you have given me everything, and I wish to repay you. I have heard of Onigashima, the island of demons. I want to travel there and defeat them, so peace may return." The old man's brow furrowed. "But you are still so young. The Oni, they are terrible beings." And so, as the fire crackled low, Momotarō explained. Oni are fearsome creatures from old stories. Giants with horns, wild hair, and terrible strength. They carry clubs of iron and bring suffering to villages. I will return, he said gently. But I must try. The old woman nodded, eyes wet. She tied up a bundle of kibi dango. Sweet millet dumplings. Take these, she said. They will give you strength. And perhaps even friends. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Momotarō tied the bundle of kibi dango at his waist and stepped out into the misty road. He waved once to his parents, who stood together in the doorway, hands clasped in blessing. As he walked through the countryside, he passed rice fields still wet with dew and hills just brushing against the sky. Before long, a dog appeared on the path, growling low and standing firm. Who are you to cross my land? The dog asked. Momotarō smiled and reached into his pouch. I am Momotarō. On a journey to Onigashima to defeat the demons who harm our people. He held out a piece of kibi dango. Join me, and we shall go together. The dog sniffed the dumpling, took it in one bite, and nodded. For such a noble cause, and such good food, I will follow you. Further along the path, as sunlight slipped through the trees, a monkey dropped from a branch and landed before them. Where do you go with such purpose? The monkey asked, tilting his head. To Onigashima, said Momotarō, to bring justice to the demons who trouble our land. He offered a dumpling with an open hand. The monkey sniffed, took the treat, and grinned. Then I will come too, he said. You may need cleverness, as well as courage. As they continued, the forest thinned, and the sky stretched wide above fields of tall grass. From that golden sky, a pheasant descended in a graceful arc and landed ahead of them. Who walks with a dog and a monkey and carries the scent of millet? The bird inquired. I am Momotarō, said the boy, and we journey to fight the Oni of Onigashima. He held out the final dumpling. The pheasant pecked it gently and replied, Then I shall fly above and watch the road ahead. You have strength, wit, and wings now. Together, the four companions walked on, their footsteps light with purpose and the sky brightening above them. When at last they reached the coast, a small boat sat waiting by the shore, swaying gently with the tide. Momotarō climbed in first, and one by one his companions followed. Dog, monkey, and pheasant. The boat pushed off with the pull of the wind and the steady rhythm of waves beneath. They sailed through the night, the stars glimmering above like silent watchers, and the sea stretching around them like a great, dark mirror. By dawn, the island of Onigashima rose before them, a jagged land of cliffs and mist, with a dark castle crouched at its heart. They stepped ashore without a word. Even the wind seemed to hush. Before them stood the great gate of the Oni fortress, shut tight and looming tall. Momotarō raised his voice, steady and clear. Oni of Onigashima, he called. I am Momotarō, and I have come to end your terror. The gates creaked open slowly, and from the shadows stepped the red-faced Oni leader. His eyes glowing, his teeth like stones. Behind him loomed his fellow demons, snarling and armed with heavy iron clubs. "Who dares disturb our island?" the leader growled. "I am Momotarō," the boy replied calmly. "I have come to stop your cruelty. Return what you have stolen, or face the strength of justice." With a roar, the Oni charged. The pheasant flew high, diving and striking from above, blinding them with swift wings. The monkey darted behind and leapt upon their backs, untying armor straps and tossing stones. The dog barked and snapped, driving them into confusion. And at the center, Momotarō stood strong and steady, fending off blows and guiding his friends. The battle was fierce, but with every move, the companions worked as one, clever, brave, and kind in purpose. Soon the Oni, bruised and breathless, fell back. Their leader dropped his club and raised a trembling hand. "Please, no more. We surrender." "Then return all that you've taken," said Momotarō, "and promise never to harm another soul again." The Oni agreed, and from the castle they carried out great chests. Gold, silk, rice, and treasures once stolen from many villages. Momotarō and his friends loaded the boat. The dog wagged his tail, the monkey swung from the mast, and the pheasant soared overhead. The wind carried them home. When they returned to the village, the people gathered in wonder. They wept with joy at the return of their treasures, and cheered for the boy who had come from a peach. Brave enough to face demons, and kind enough to forgive them. Momotaro's parents embraced him tightly, their hearts full to bursting. The dog, the monkey, and the pheasant were honored as heroes, with warm food, soft beds, and songs sung in their names. From that day on, peace returned to the land. Fields grew golden with rice, rivers flowed clear, and children laughed without fear. And as for Momotarō, his name lived on, not just in stories, but in every act of courage, friendship, and kindness that followed. Story 2, The Snail Son. From multiple countryside regions of Japan. Once, in a quiet village nestled between low, misty hills, there lived an old couple who had no children. Their house was small, shaded by plum trees and edged with mossy stones. And though the seasons passed gently, their hearts remained heavy with longing. For many years, they had prayed at the temple and offered sweet rice at the family altar, wishing only for a child to love and care for. One warm summer morning, as the old woman tended to the garden, she sighed softly and spoke aloud. Oh, if we could have even a child as small and simple as a snail, we would be happy.
Her husband, who was repairing a gate nearby, chuckled and replied,
A snail, eh?
Well, even a snail might bring laughter to this quiet home.
That very night, under a sky washed in silver moonlight, a miracle happened.
As the old woman stepped outside to draw water from the well,
she saw something glimmering in the moonbeams by the garden path. Nestled on a leaf of the morning glory vine was a tiny snail. Its shell shimmering like lacquered wood, its body tucked in a delicate coil. It seemed to pulse with quiet warmth, as if it were more than just a creature of the garden. Startled but gentle, she bent down and whispered, Little one, where have you come from? To her amazement, the snail lifted its head and spoke in a small, clear voice.
Mother, I have come to be your son.
She gasped and reached out with trembling hands, cradling the snail with the tender care she had reserved all her life.
Her husband hurried to her side, and when he too heard the snail speak,
he fell to his knees in awe.
From that moment, the snail became their child.
They named him Katatsumori, meaning snail, and raised him with joy.
He had his own place at the dinner table, where they served him drops of warm rice water and pieces of fruit.
Though small, his words were thoughtful, and his heart was full of kindness.
He greeted them each morning and asked about their health, and he listened patiently when they shared stories of their youth. The seasons passed, and the snail son grew wise.
One day, when the skies were brushed with spring clouds, Katatsumori said,
Mother, Father, I would like to marry. The old couple looked at one another, surprised. They loved him dearly, but the world beyond their home was not always gentle.
Who would marry a snail? The old man asked softly, though without cruelty. Katatsumori did not seem disheartened.
I wish to marry the daughter of the village headman.
The old woman gasped, for the village headman was proud and stern.
And his daughter, by all accounts, was beautiful and refined. Still, they did not wish to deny their son.
So the next morning, dressed in his finest silken leaf, Katatsumori made his way to the headman's estate,
with his father walking beside him.
When they arrived, the servants laughed, for they had never seen a snail walk so proudly.
But the headman was a man of deep manners, and though he raised an eyebrow, he listened as the father made the request. My son, the old man said, wishes to marry your daughter. He may not look like other boys, but his heart is good, and his spirit is strong. There was a long silence. The headman looked at the snail son, who stood calmly on a wooden tray laid before him. Then the headman said, If your son can work in my rice fields for one full season, I will consider it.
Katatsumori bowed his small head and answered,
Then I shall begin tomorrow. And he did.
Day by day, rain or shine, the snail son made his way to the rice paddies.
Though his body was slow, he never rested. He tended the fields with such care that the rice grew taller and stronger than ever before.
The farmers shook their heads in amazement, for where he passed, the plants seemed to thrive.
At the end of the season, The fields were golden and full. The headman inspected them and could find no fault.
True to his word, he allowed his daughter to meet the one who had tended the fields.
At first, she was startled. But as she sat with him in the shade of a willow, listening to his soft voice, and his words of thoughtfulness and humor, she began to smile. Day after day, they met, and her smile grew warmer. Then one morning, as the first petals of cherry blossoms fell,
Katatsumori came to the garden early.
He waited in silence, until the daughter appeared with a gentle smile. "You have come each day without fail," she said. "I have never known such kindness." And at that moment, something shimmered in the air, as if the wind itself had sighed.
The snail shell cracked open, soft as the sound of dew touching water. Light spilled forth, and from within rose a handsome young man, radiant and smiling. Katatsumori was no longer a snail.
His true form had been revealed. A blessing hidden in humility. The daughter took his hand, and they returned to the headman together.
Her father, seeing the joy on her face and the kindness in the young man's eyes, gave his blessing with quiet pride. The wedding was held beneath the cherry trees, with lanterns swaying and villagers smiling.
And the old couple, who had once wished only for a snail to call son, now watched as he began a new life, surrounded by love.
To this day, the story of Katatsumori is told in the countryside. A tale of patience, devotion, and the quiet magic that lives in even the smallest of hearts. Story 3, Tamamo-no-Mae. From classical Japanese court legends, tales preserved in the Heike Monogatari and Teiki chronicles. In the twilight years of the Heian period, when courtiers glided like shadows behind painted screens and the night air was thick with incense and poetry,
the emperor's palace stood at the heart of a quiet world.
Hidden behind silk-draped gates, Heian-kyo was a city of elegance and whispers, where lanterns flickered like stars in the corridors and the rustle of a kimono could stir more than a shout.
One autumn morning, beneath the crimson canopy of maple leaves, she arrived. Her name was Tamamo-no-Mae. No one knew her true origin.
Some said she had appeared during the chrysanthemum viewing ceremony, stepping out from among the courtiers as though she had always belonged.
Others claimed she was the niece of a noble from the eastern provinces, or the daughter of a scholar sent from the celestial north. But all agreed on one thing. She was unlike any woman the court had ever known. She was the color of moonlight.
Her robes, layer upon layer, seemed to breathe with her, catching the wind like autumn mist. Her voice was soft, melodic, each word carefully chosen, falling like petals onto quiet ears. And her eyes, golden brown like fallen ginkgo leaves, held knowledge older than the scrolls in the imperial library.
Within days, the emperor noticed her. Within weeks, he summoned her to his inner garden.
There, beneath a canopy of weeping willows and dragonflies that hovered like tiny spirits, they spoke for hours. She spoke of the stars,
how Venus rose before dawn and why the moon's shape could stir a person's mood.
She quoted poetry from China and India and asked the emperor his thoughts on the nature of time.
She never sought attention, and yet, all attention fell toward her.
The court, once a garden of many blossoms, now leaned toward a single bloom.
Tamamo-no-Mae became the emperor's favorite, his silent companion at meetings,
his soft laughter in the echoing corridors,
his comfort when sleeplessness seized him under the pale lamps of midnight.
She composed poems that made even old ministers blink back tears. She played the koto with a grace that made the court musicians lay down their strings in quiet awe.
Yet, there was something else. A hush followed her, like wind moving ahead of a storm.
A court lady once watched her standing still beneath a plum tree, not moving for an entire hour, eyes closed, as if listening to something no one else could hear. A servant once swore he saw her shadow split into two, just for a heartbeat, as she passed through a sunlit hall.
But none dared speak aloud.
She was too beautiful, too poised, too favored by the emperor, who had not smiled so easily in many years.
Then, the illness began. It came slowly, like mist rising from the earth. The emperor began to feel tired during the day. His skin paled. His dreams grew troubled. He would wake in the night, shivering though no cold breeze passed through the rooms. Healers came from every corner of the land.
They brought roots, sacred stones, golden needles, and incantations in whispered Sanskrit. Monks lined the palace hallways, their chants weaving through the air like birdsong in a haunted forest.
But nothing helped.
Tamamo-no-Mae remained ever gentle.
She sat by the emperor's side through long, moonlit nights.
She brewed teas with fragrant herbs from distant provinces, laid cool cloths upon his forehead, and hummed old lullabies from forgotten regions of the land.
And still, his strength waned. The halls grew quieter, the music less frequent. Where once courtiers bustled with scrolls and verse, now silence lingered like fog upon a mirror. And so, from the whispered corners of the court, a name began to stir.
Aid no Seimei. Aid no Seimei was no ordinary onmyoji.
No common diviner or star reader.
He had been born under rare stars and raised among temples where spirits were said to walk by day.
His eyes were calm, deep as ink, and it was whispered he could see what others could not.
Even into the folds between the world of the living and that of the unseen. Summoned in secret, Seimei entered the palace on a moonless night, walking barefoot across stones still warm from the day. He carried only a small pouch of bone-white charms and a scroll inked in the old style. Drawn with a brush made from foxtail hairs. In the emperor's chamber, Tamamo-no-Mae stood silently beside the bed, her hands folded, her gaze lowered. She bowed deeply, her voice gentle. "We are grateful for your wisdom, Seimei."
He nodded but said nothing.
He placed 5 stones in the corners of the room.
Lit a single candle made of pressed lotus wax. And then he waited. The flame flickered once, twice, then steadied, burning tall and blue.
Seime's eyes narrowed.
He stepped close to Tamamo-no-Mae and reached into his sleeve. "Forgive me," he murmured, "but I must test your spirit." He lifted a charm, no larger than a leaf, marked with a symbol so old it had no name. As it touched the edge of her sleeve, the air changed, not violently, but as though the entire world had taken a breath and held it. Her eyes met his then, not with surprise, but with something ancient, unreadable. And in that instant, Seimei knew. She was not merely a woman of beauty and intellect. She was a fox spirit. Not one of mischief, but of power, of old intent. She had worn many names before this one, and this time, she had nearly touched the center of the empire.
Seimei bowed deeply, then turned away. He did not accuse her.
He did not call for guards or monks.
He merely stepped outside and whispered to the stars. Within hours, the court was stirred into quiet action. The emperor, weak but still sovereign, ordered Tamamo-no-Mae to be tested again. In the fields of Nasu, far from the palace walls. And so, with her long hair bound in ceremonial braids and her robes made simple, she rode under the cover of night, escorted by Seimei and a dozen silent warriors.
The wind on the plain was sharp. The grasses bent low, as though bowing to the moment.
At the heart of the field, where the earth had long been bare and quiet, they formed a ring of stone and flame.
Seimei stepped forward, his staff in hand. "Tamamo-no-Mae," he said softly. "Reveal your true form before the sun touches the hills. Only then will we know what spirit you carry." For a moment, all was still. Even the birds seemed to pause in flight. Tamamo-no-Mae closed her eyes. When she opened them, the golden sheen in her gaze had returned.
Not the glow of candlelight, but something older, otherworldly.
Then, with a breath, her form shimmered, like heat rising from stone. And the air broke open.
Where once stood a court lady now rose a white fox, nine-tailed, tall as a man, with eyes like mirrors of dawn.
She stood at the center of the ring, proud and still, the wind lifting her fur as if in respect. The warriors drew their bows. Seimei raised his hand, and they waited.
"You who have walked among us in silence and shadow," he intoned, "will you now choose to return?"
The fox did not move. Then, with the smallest of nods, she turned and bounded into the tall grasses, vanishing like mist into the folds of the hills.
Days passed.
Search parties combed the plains, but found nothing.
Only fox tracks that led nowhere, and a strange, fragrant hush in the air.
Then, one morning, at the edge of the fields, a farmer found it.
A single stone, smooth and pale, warm despite the frost around it.
Birds would not perch near it. Animals shied away. The villagers named it Sesoseki, the killing stone, and they said her spirit was sealed within. Monks built shrines nearby.
They chanted and prayed, tied charms to its shadow, and lit incense that drifted like morning fog.
Yet, even as centuries passed, the stone remained. It did not crack, did not shift, but pulsed faintly, as if remembering.
Some nights, wanderers claimed to hear a voice,
soft as silk, heavy with sadness, carried on the wind. Tamamo-no-Mae, they whispered. Once beautiful, once wise, now only remembered.
Story 4. The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter. From the 10th century Taketori Monogatari, Japan's oldest recorded folktale, beloved for over 1,000 years and closely tied to Mount Fuji's name and mythology. Long ago, in a quiet village embraced by bamboo forests and rolling hills, there lived an old bamboo cutter and his gentle wife. Their lives were simple and kind, filled with the rhythm of daily labor, shared meals, and the rustling music of bamboo leaves in the wind.
Yet one thing their hearts yearned for had never come, a child of their own.
One morning, as the first light of dawn scattered gold across the grove, the bamboo cutter noticed something strange.
A single stalk glowing faintly, as if lit from within.
Curious, he stepped closer and sliced the stalk with care. Inside was a tiny girl, radiant and whole, no larger than his thumb.
She shone softly, like moonlight held in a cup. The old man's hands trembled as he cradled the child. "She is a gift," he whispered, "sent to us from the heavens."
He carried her home, and when his wife saw her, she wept with joy. They named her Kiyohime, Princess of Radiance.
From that moment on, their home blossomed with quiet miracles.
Each time the bamboo cutter returned to the grove, he found stalks filled with gold, with fine silk, with precious stones.
Their humble hut was soon transformed, but more than wealth, it was the girl's presence that made the home glow with warmth.
Kiyohime grew at a mysterious pace, becoming a young woman within a few moons.
Her beauty was unlike anything the world had known.
Her skin glowed like polished ivory, her eyes shimmered like still water under starlight, and her voice was soft, lilting, like the hush that comes before a snowfall.
News of her beauty spread across the provinces.
Noblemen and princes traveled from distant lands just to lay eyes on her. But Kiyohime remained reclusive, quiet, and often distant.
She seemed to exist at a slight angle from the world, as if her heart were elsewhere.
Among the many who sought her hand, 5 noblemen came forward with bold declarations of love. To each, she offered a task, an impossible quest to retrieve a legendary treasure. To one, bring me the stone begging bowl of the Buddha from faraway India. To another, fetch the jeweled branch from the island of Horai, where immortals dwell. To a third, retrieve the robe made of fire rat fur, said to resist all flame. To the fourth, bring me the colored jewel from a dragon's neck. And to the last, find me the cowrie shell born from a swallow's nest. Each failed, one by one, some returning with forgeries, others defeated by the sheer impossibility of their task. And through it all, Kiyohime remained unchanged, her gaze drifting off into the night sky, where the moon glowed bright and solemn.
Even the emperor, having heard of her beauty and grace, sent a letter requesting her presence at court. But she declined, gently, humbly. "I am not fit for such a place," she wrote, "for my heart is not truly here."
Still, the emperor persisted, and at last, he visited her home.
When their eyes met, there was a quiet understanding between them.
He did not press her, but from that day onward, he sent her poems, gifts, and messages, hoping one day she might return his affection. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, Kiyohime sat quietly in the garden. The old bamboo cutter approached, sensing the weight in her silence. "Child," he said softly, "you have grown ever more distant these past nights. What troubles your heart?" She turned to him, her eyes filled with a sadness deeper than the sky.
"Father," she said, "the time has come for me to tell you the truth.
I am not of this world. I was sent here from the moon, punishment for some forgotten rule I broke in a life before this." The bamboo cutter shook his head, heartbreaking.
"No, you are our daughter, our joy. You were sent to us as a blessing, not a punishment."
But Kiyohime only looked away.
"On the next full moon," she said, "they will come for me. I must return, whether I wish it or not.
And when I go, I will leave behind all memory of this place." The bamboo cutter and his wife wept as she spoke, and word of her sorrowful fate reached the ears of the emperor.
Determined to protect her, he sent warriors to surround her home. They lit torches, drew bows, and swore to guard her from any force, even one from the heavens. But when the full moon rose, the night turned still.
Clouds parted as if pulled by unseen hands, and a silver light bathed the village in silence. From that light descended a procession, not soldiers, but serene beings in robes of shimmering white, their faces calm, their steps soundless.
None could stop them.
Even the bravest warriors lowered their weapons, overcome by a peace that stilled the soul. Kiyohime stood in the garden, tears upon her cheeks, and held out her hands to her earthly parents.
"You gave me love," she whispered, "and I gave you my heart. But now I must return to where time does not move, and sorrow does not linger." One of the moonfolk stepped forward, offering a small vial. "She must drink this," he said gently. "It will ease her pain, and she will forget." She drank, slowly. The tears dried on her cheeks. Her eyes no longer held the sorrow of parting, but the quiet acceptance of a soul returning home.
And then she was lifted into the sky, her robes trailing starlight, her form rising until she was only a glimmer in the moon's light. The bamboo cutter and his wife watched until the last glow faded.
They never saw her again. But every full moon, they sat beneath the sky, eyes lifted, waiting, remembering.
The emperor, too, mourned. He wrote her letters, tied to branches, and at last, placed her final letter on the highest peak of the land, Mount Fuji.
He ordered it burned, hoping the smoke would reach her above. And they say the mountain still smokes, to this day.
Story 5, Kaidan Botan Dōrō. From the Edo period tale popularized in Sanyu Taiencho's 1886 Rakugo and Kabuki adaptations. In the warm hush of a summer evening, during the sacred days of Obon, when the line between the living and the dead grows thin, a solitary samurai named Hogawara Shinzaburo wandered the lantern-lined streets of Edo's Nazu district.
The night air was heavy with incense and the soft rustle of yukata silk.
Lanterns swayed gently from wooden posts, casting warm glows on quiet stone paths.
The world was hushed, yet somehow watching.
As Shinzaburo passed beneath the boughs of a willow tree, he heard it. The soft clack of getter sandals, echoing faintly on the stones behind him. Turning, he saw two women in white robes.
One young and graceful, carrying a lantern painted with blooming peonies. The other older, walking just a step behind.
"Good evening," the younger said, her voice like wind brushing over water.
Her name, she offered, was Otsuyu. They spoke briefly, soft words beneath softer lantern light. And before long, she turned away with a smile, disappearing into the night. The next evening, she returned. And again, the evening after that.
Each time, Shinzaburo greeted her with a quiet bow and a heart that beat a little faster. Each evening, they walked a little further, talked a little longer. They spoke of stars and seasons, of forgotten poems and faint childhood memories.
Her voice filled the empty corners of his world. One night, unable to bear her absence at dawn, he invited her into his home.
They shared tea beneath the lantern's gentle glow, and in the hush of midnight, she reached for his hand.
He, in turn, held hers with reverence, as though it might vanish with the wind. And she stayed until morning. For several nights, this continued.
Each time the lantern passed through his gate, his loneliness faded like smoke. But one morning, as the scent of night still clung to the house, a neighbor happened to glance through Shinzaburo's window.
What he saw chilled the blood in his veins.
There, in the dim room, lay Shinzaburo, his face calm in slumber, beside a woman whose skin was drawn tight and pale.
Her hand, though delicate, was no longer of flesh, but of bone.
Her companion, too, no longer human.
Terrified, the neighbor fetched a Buddhist priest, who came swiftly.
The priest placed sacred Ofuda talismans on every wall and chanted until the shadows themselves seemed to flinch.
This woman is no longer of this world, he warned. She is drawn to him, but it will cost him his life.
Shinzaburo listened in silence. He agreed to sleep that night in the temple, beneath the chanting of monks and the safety of sacred texts.
But when the night deepened and the wind grew still, he slipped away through the temple gate.
The pull of Otsuyu's presence was too strong. He returned to his home, to the room where her lantern waited, glowing like a flower in bloom.
The next morning, the priest found the house quiet.
He stepped through the door and found Shinzaburo's body, cold, smiling, and lifeless beside an empty kimono and a lantern that no longer glowed. To this day, some say they see a lantern swaying gently through the streets of Nazu when the summer winds rise. And if you look carefully, you might see two shadows walking side by side. One solid, one just barely there. For some, Love defies the boundary between worlds. Story 6, Bunbuku Chagama, Lucky Tea Kettle. From Edo period Japanese folk tradition, treasured across generations and rooted in the legends of Morinji Temple in Gunma Prefecture. In a quiet valley wrapped in mist and pine, there stood an old wooden temple, Morinji. Its stone steps were worn smooth by the feet of monks, and its halls smelled always of sandalwood and tatami.
Time there moved slowly, like the drifting of incense through the rafters.
The head priest, a gentle man with tired eyes and a voice like a river at dusk, had lived many years among the chants and silence. His only companion was an old Chagama, a blackened iron kettle he used every morning to heat water for tea and prayers. The kettle was plain to look at, round and dented, with a handle that wobbled, but it had served faithfully through the years. When steam rose from its spout and mingled with morning light, the priest would smile and whisper, "Thank you, old friend."
But one morning, as the coals beneath the hearth crackled and the scent of ash filled the room, something strange happened. The kettle began to tremble. At first it was just a shiver.
The priest, thinking it was the boil, leaned close. Then, to his astonishment, the kettle sprouted a tail. A soft, whooshy tail curling from its base.
He stepped back in alarm.
Next came legs, small, furry, and twitching. And then a head, round with twitching ears and curious eyes. A raccoon dog, a tanuki, emerged from the kettle's shell, though the iron spout and handle still clung to its back like a shell on a turtle. The priest gasped, "A spirit? Here?" The tanuki blinked, unsure.
It turned, startled by its own feet, and tried to scurry from the fire.
The novice monks, hearing the noise, rushed in. They cried out at the strange creature and, frightened by the shape-shifting sight, they reached for brooms and poked at it in confusion. The kettle tumbled over itself, squeaking, then, poof, collapsed into its old iron form again, the tail vanishing like steam.
All was still. The priest, heart heavy, knelt beside it. "It meant no harm," he murmured. "But I am no keeper of spirits." And so, after some thought, he decided to sell the kettle.
In the bustling town beyond the mountain road, a cheerful peddler wandered from village to village. His cart jingled with odds and ends, bamboo flutes, carved combs, rice bowls, and lacquered fans.
He loved curious things. When he came to the temple gates, the priest offered him the kettle.
"It's unique," the priest said carefully. The peddler eyed the old pot. "I've seen duller." "How much?" They agreed on a fair price, and the peddler tucked the kettle into his cart and set off toward his lodging.
That night, beneath the paper lantern swaying in the breeze, the peddler unpacked his goods.
As he unwrapped the kettle, he whispered, "Old thing, you'd better be lucky."
Then, just as the moonlight touched its side, the kettle stirred. The peddler leaned in, eyes wide.
With a rustle and a shimmer, out popped a furry head, round, smiling, with tiny ears. The peddler dropped his rice cake. You can talk?
Only when someone listens, said the tanuki softly, still wearing half its kettle.
It bowed deeply. I am sorry to have frightened the priest. I was merely hiding, and the fire made me jump. Thank you for taking me in. The peddler blinked. You're not a cursed pot?
No, the tanuki said, amused just. Unusually shaped. They spoke long into the night.
By the time the coals turned to ash, the peddler had brewed 2 cups of tea, and they had struck a quiet, unusual deal. The tanuki would perform each evening in a way that brought joy, not fear. And in return, the peddler would offer it a warm space to rest, gentle words, and the promise that no iron fire would ever again touch its back. The tanuki, eager to repay kindness, suggested, "Let me perform. I can walk a rope, balance on one paw, and spin on my kettle bottom."
The peddler's eyes sparkled. We'll call you the dancing kettle.
In time, the dancing kettle became a wonder of the traveling road. Villagers would gather at dusk, children on shoulders, elders wrapped in shawls, their faces lit by torchlight and wonder. The tanuki, still bearing his iron shell, would tumble and leap, rolling and balancing with cheerful charm. He would twirl across tight ropes strung between trees, spin in circles atop the peddler's cart, and bow with exaggerated flourish. The peddler played a bamboo flute, his notes rising like laughter into the stars. Coins filled their bowl not just out of awe, but out of delight, for they brought joy wherever they went.
And the kettle, though no longer used for tea, had found a new warmth, one not made by fire, but by laughter and companionship.
Yet, one evening beneath the quiet sky, the tanuki sat still.
I've enjoyed this, it said, but my spirit is tied to the temple. It is where I was meant to dwell. The peddler nodded. Then we'll return together.
They journeyed back to Morinji.
There, beneath the pines and lanterns, they met the priest again.
The tanuki bowed deep. Forgive my earlier fright. I wish now to rest here, as I was meant to. The priest smiled, tears in his eyes. You've brought joy to many, you are welcome home. And so, the tanuki returned to its kettle form and was placed gently on the temple altar.
The peddler left behind a gift, a bell of silver, and often returned to visit. The kettle was never used again.
But even now, when incense drifts beneath the rafters of Morinji, some say you can hear a soft chuckle near the hearth, or glimpse a small paw print in the dust.
For kindness repaid in trust becomes a treasure.
And where warmth and wonder meet, there, too, is fortune. Story 7, Urashima Tarō. From ancient Japanese folktale tradition, dating back to the 8th century and cherished through generations in tales such as the Fudoki, Nihon Shoki, and Otojizoshi.
Long ago, in a quiet fishing village that clung gently to the edge of the sea, there lived a young man named Urashima Tarō.
He was a gentle soul, known for his kindness and patience, spending his days mending nets and rowing across the waves, casting his line not just for fish, but for peace. One morning, as he strolled along the sand, he heard shouts and laughter.
Ahead, a group of boys were tormenting a small turtle, flipping it on its back, jabbing at its shell. "Enough," Tarō called out. His voice, though calm, carried weight.
The children startled and fled, leaving behind their frightened victim.
He knelt, brushing the sand from the turtle's shell.
"Easy now," he whispered, cradling it in his hands.
"You're safe."
He carried it to the water's edge and watched as it paddled away, vanishing beneath the gentle surf.
The next day, as he fished alone, a shadow stirred beneath his boat.
A great turtle rose from the depths, larger than any Tarō had seen. Its shell like polished stone, its eyes old and kind.
"You are Urashima Tarō," it said.
"You saved my life. I have come to repay you. Will you ride upon my back?" "Where would we go?" Tarō asked, eyes wide with wonder. "To Yugu-jo," said the turtle. "The dragon palace beneath the sea, a place of joy beyond sorrow, where time drifts like the tide." Though startled, Tarō felt no fear.
He climbed upon the turtle's back, and they sank gently beneath the surface. Down they descended through a world of wonder.
The sea opened like a dream, lit by swirls of light that filtered through layers of water, deepening in hue with every fathom. They passed forests of kelp that swayed like dancers, fish that gleamed like moving jewels, and arches of coral that glowed with soft inner fire.
They drifted through silver shoals that spiraled in perfect circles, past grottos where pearls nestled like moons, and sea anemones waved their tendrils like tiny stars come to rest. At times, sea dragons peered from caverns, blinking slowly as they passed.
Giant clams opened like gates, revealing polished sand and hidden treasures in their hearts. Then, far below, Yugu-jo appeared. A palace of impossible beauty, rising from the ocean floor like a living dream. Its towers shimmered with shells and mother-of-pearl, its gates carved from coral in forms both delicate and grand. Inside, the halls were lit by floating orbs that flickered with the light of the sea above. Floors were polished smooth from abalone and jade, and courtyards bloomed with flowers that opened and closed to invisible tides. Servants glided silently, their garments trailing bubbles like petals on a stream. There, he met Princess Otohime, daughter of the sea god. She wore robes woven of foam and moonlight.
Her voice was the hush of waves on shore. "You are welcome here, kind Urashima," she said. "Stay with us, in peace." And so he did.
Days passed like dreams, filled with feasts of floating fruits, dances lit by glowing jellyfish, and music played on shells that sang like the sea wind.
Time in Yugu-jo was like drifting mist. Unmeasured, gentle, without edge.
Yet, one morning, as a curl of sea breeze brushed his cheek, Tarō thought of home. Of the sound of gulls over the fishing boats, of his mother's cooking pot steaming with rice, of the village path beneath his sandals. "I must return," he told Otohime, though it pained him.
She nodded, though sorrow clouded her gaze. "Then take this," she said, handing him a lacquered box tied with silk.
"It is a tomate barco. Promise you will not open it no matter what happens." He promised, bowed, and rode once more upon the turtle's back, up through the sea toward the sunlight. But when Tarō stepped onto the shore, the world was no longer his own.
The village was there, yet different. The houses had shifted, the trees older, unfamiliar. The people, they did not know his name. He wandered, heart sinking, seeking faces he had once known. But no one remained.
He learned then, from an old record keeper, that Urashima Tarō had vanished 300 years before. Alone on a hill above the sea, Tarō sat with the tomate barco in his hands. Otohime's words echoed in his mind.
"Do not open it." But sorrow pressed close, heavier than the ocean. He had no place, no time to return to. And so, slowly, with trembling hands, he untied the silk. A wisp of white mist drifted out. Soft as breath, cold as centuries. And in that instant, his body aged. His hair turned silver, his back bent, his hands wrinkled with the weight of 300 years.
Some say he became a crane, flying over the waves until he vanished into the clouds. Others say he was swept into the ocean, returning to Yugujo in spirit.
But the box remained, and with it the tale. For kindness is timeless. But time, once opened, cannot be undone.
Story 8, Anchin and Kiyohime. From the classical Japanese Setsuwa tradition, first recorded in the 11th century collection Dana Honkoku Hokekyo Kenki, and later in the Konjaku Monogatari issue.
Long ago, in the soft folded mountains of the Ki Peninsula, a young monk named Anchin began a sacred journey.
He had trained for years in the quiet cloisters of Nara, where bells tolled like sighs and silence held the air like snow.
He walked with the stillness of one who had turned inward, seeking the path of enlightenment, yet carrying within him the restless murmur of a heart not fully stilled. It was spring when he set out for Kumano, the great shrine hidden in mist.
A pilgrimage meant to cleanse and deepen his vow. The road wound through forests where camellias fell with weightless grace and the scent of pine clung to every breath. One evening, as dusk painted the hills with indigo and rust, Anchin arrived at a small home near the Hidaka River.
The family who lived there often gave lodging to pilgrims.
The father, a humble landholder, welcomed Anchin warmly, offering rice, mountain greens, and a quiet room by the hearth. Among the household was a young woman named Kiyohime. She was no maiden of great renown or fortune, but she moved with grace. Her sleeves trailing like river mist, her eyes soft as moss underfoot. She brought the monk tea without a word, her head bowed.
Yet when she turned to go, something lingered in her gaze.
That night, beneath the thatched roof, Anchin sat in meditation.
Yet his thoughts wandered. Her voice, when she had spoken briefly, had been low, kind. Her presence had stirred a warmth he had not anticipated. A simple kindness, but one that clung like perfume on the sleeve.
Kiyohime, too, sat awake in the next room, her heart a tangle of quiet fire. She had seen many monks pass through, bored and silent, unreachable as clouds.
But this one had smiled.
He had thanked her, eyes meeting hers not as a priest might, but as a man.
In the days that followed, rain kept Anchin from moving on.
He lingered, resting under the dripping eaves, exchanging words with the father and sometimes with Kiyohime.
She brought him persimmons. They spoke of the river's moods, of the weather. She recited a poem once, shyly, and he listened, surprised by the lilt in her voice.
There were glances, small pauses that felt too full.
He told himself it meant nothing, yet he delayed his departure. When the sky cleared, he made ready to leave.
Kiyohime stood at the gate, her hands folded, her eyes searching his. "Will you return?"
she asked. Anchin hesitated, then offered a gentle nod. "I will pass this way again," he said. It was a soft promise, meant to comfort.
But Kiyohime heard it as something more. Seasons passed.
When Anchin returned, it was not with intent, but by the same road.
Kiyohime saw him from afar and ran to greet him. Her joy was radiant, blooming like plum flowers after snow. But Anchin, now deeper in his vows, felt fear stir in him.
He saw not a girl, but a longing he must not embrace. He bowed low and gave thanks for her kindness. Then that night, he slipped away.
At dawn, Kiyohime found his room empty.
His bedding still warm. The road still fresh with his footprints. Something inside her broke. She followed. Through the woods, across the fields. Her sleeves catching thorns, her hair unbound, her breath wild with sorrow. She called his name once, twice. Anchin heard her. Fear twisted in his gut like a serpent. He ran faster, his prayer beads clattering.
He crossed the river and reached the Dojoji temple, begging the monks to hide him.
They led him to the great bell, hollow and still. He crawled inside and held his breath, heart pounding against the bronze walls.
Outside, Kiyohime reached the river's edge.
Her voice was hoarse, her hands trembling. But the water would not stop her. She plunged in.
And the legend says her grief burned so fiercely that her form twisted, changed, becoming that of a serpent, a being born of heartbreak and fury. With scales glistening like obsidian and eyes alight with sorrow, she slithered across the stones, her breath hissing like steam.
She reached the temple gates. The monks scattered in terror. She coiled around the great bell where Anchin hid, sensing his trembling spirit within. With one long exhale, she breathed fire.
The bell glowed red, then white, as heat surged through the metal.
And within, Anchin was no more. Only ashes remained.
In time, Monks purified the grounds, chanting sutras to ease restless spirits.
And in quiet corners of Japan, the story was whispered.
Of love that became longing, longing that became rage, and a girl whose heartbreak echoed through centuries.
Some say her spirit wandered the riverbanks, unable to find peace. Others believe she was reborn. Not as a serpent, but as a woman again. To live a life of reflection and prayer, far from the bell that once held her sorrow. But always, her name remains.
Kiyohime,
the one who loved too deeply.
Story 9, The Boy Who Drew Cats. From a traditional Japanese ghost folktale recorded and adapted by Lafcadio Hearn in the 19th century, rooted in older oral legends from rural Japan. In a quiet village bordered by whispering rice fields and low forested hills, there lived a poor farmer and his many children. The youngest son was a strange boy, small and sickly, with a quiet air and watchful eyes. He was clever, far too clever for fieldwork, and though his hands were clumsy with tools, they were graceful with a brush. From the moment he could hold a stick of charcoal, he drew cats. On paper, on screens, on his own sleeves, even on the walls of their home. Always cats. Curled and crouching, sitting and pouncing, fierce and serene.
His parents, unsure what to do with a boy who would not grow strong, sent him to a nearby temple to become a priest.
The monks welcomed him, but it did not take long before he filled their scrolls and walls with ink-drawn cats.
He lacks discipline, the head priest sighed. And perhaps he is not suited for the robes.
With a kind farewell, they gave him food for the road and sent him away, advising, gently, avoid large places at night, keep to small. The boy did not understand the warning, but he nodded and set off, clutching his bundle. The sky dimmed as he wandered the countryside, until he saw the outline of another temple rising beyond a thicket of trees. It was larger than the one he had left, grander, though covered in ivy and gloom.
No lights shone from within. Perhaps it is abandoned, he whispered.
Still, the doors opened without protest, and he entered, heart hopeful. Inside, dust hung in the air like cobwebs, and silence pressed against the walls.
He found a small room and set down his bundle. But as always, his fingers itched. From his pack he took brush and ink, and began to draw. On every surface he could find
sleek cats, wild cats, leaping and snarling and watching with wise golden eyes.
Night fell, and with it came a silence thick and unnatural.
The shadows inside the grand temple stretched long, as though reluctant to lie still.
Then, the boy remembered.
Avoid large places at night. Keep to small.
His breath caught.
Every corner of the vast temple now seemed darker, deeper, and unknowable. He moved quickly, heart pounding like temple drums. At the far end of a corridor, he found a small storage cabinet. Narrow, wooden, and musty.
No bigger than a child's coffin. He opened it, slipped inside, and closed the door with trembling hands. The wood creaked softly.
Inside was nothing but broomsticks and cobwebs, but it smelled of incense and old dust.
He tucked his knees to his chest, wrapped his arms around them, and waited. The night deepened. Then, a noise, distant at first, like something dragging itself across the floor. Claws scraped over stone, slow and deliberate. The boy held his breath. A low, chittering sound followed.
Sharp as broken glass, rising and falling in the air.
Then came the screech. It wasn't human. It wasn't beast. It was something between. A sound like blood boiling through a hollow throat.
The walls trembled. The old floorboards groaned. The screen doors slammed open with invisible fury.
Something was hunting. The boy clutched his sleeves to his face, trying not to cry out.
Every instinct told him to flee, to scream, but he stayed hidden.
And then, silence, terrible, waiting silence, followed by a sound.
Wet, ragged, final.
When the morning light crept through the slats of the cabinet door, the boy stirred. Silence hung heavy, but it was not the silence of fear. It was the stillness that follows a storm.
He slid the door open and stepped out, legs unsteady beneath him.
The temple floor was smeared with dark stains that led toward the main hall.
He followed them, breath shallow, heart trembling like a leaf on wind.
And there, beneath the high altar, he found it.
A goblin rat demon, massive and grotesque, its body twisted and still, its eyes wide in death. It was larger than any beast he had ever seen, with claws like curved knives and yellowed fangs frozen in a final snarl.
Deep slashes marred its hide, as though torn by 100 tiny blades. The boy turned slowly, heart pounding. And then he saw the cats.
Every one he had drawn now seemed more vivid, more lifelike.
And on their painted whiskers, tiny flecks of red. Not ink, but blood. Word of the boy spread like spring wind through the valleys.
When villagers came to clean the temple, they found only the boy, his brush, and the cats that watched from the walls.
They never found the beast again. In time, he became a painter of great renown.
But never again did he draw cats without care, or without purpose. Story 10, Yotsuya Kaidan, Oiwa's Revenge. Adapted from the 1825 kabuki play Takaido Yotsuya Kaidan by Tsuruya Nanboku 4, itself drawn from vivid Edo period rumors and folk traditions. In the years after the peace of Tokugawa's rise, many samurai found themselves masterless.
Ronin, wandering in shame.
One such man was Tamiya Iemonde.
He carried himself with a measured pride, but his heart throbbed with frustration. He had been born of noble lineage, yet fate and empty pockets had led him to poverty.
Iemon's salvation came disguised as duty. He was introduced to Oiwa, the daughter of Yotsuya Saman, a minor samurai with little means.
Oiwa was gentle, a pale, soft-spoken woman with earnest loyalty.
She tended Iemon's wounds with tender care,
and supported him with kind-hearted belief. When he first met her under paper lantern glow,
he recognized their shared dignity and hardship,
and agreed to marry her. For a time, they lived modestly but with shared hope.
Oiwa cooked rice porridge by firelight, and offered smiling words in return for Iemon's respectful nod. Yet behind his eyes, his dreams flickered toward something far beyond their hut.
A world of status, comfort, connections. That ambition grew heavy when Saman, proud but poor,
subtly leaned on Iemon to upgrade the household,
to arrange a marriage of advantage between his sister and someone of wealth.
Already insecure and restless, Iemon snapped when Saman pressed at his honor,
reminding him of debts he could never repay. One night, anger erupted. He struck Saman down. Once, twice, until the man lay still on the floor, his blood blooming in red.
Horrified at his own violence, Iemon called upon a minor servant, Na-Osuke, to conceal the act.
They planted evidence of wandering thieves at the murder site, and Iemon quietly withdrew the body. The fate did not let him rest.
He learned of a wealthy woman, Ome, whom he could marry,
if he could dispose of Oiwa. Plans were whispered among candlelight. Ome's family would fund him.
If he eliminated Oiwa's bloom from the family,
a poison, a facial cream, would scar her beyond recovery.
Oiwa, trusting and innocent, applied the cream as instructed by her husband.
At first, it tingled. Then her once delicate face swelled grotesquely, a cracked mask of wronged flesh.
She looked in a silver bowl and screamed when her reflection shattered. Iemon, returning, recoiled in revulsion,
shame choking his throat.
That night, Oiwa sat in darkness, trembling and broken.
She reached for a sword, not in rage, but confusion and sorrow. As she staggered, she stumbled and fell upon the blade. With her final breath, she cursed him. The husband who loved ambition more than her life.
Iemon and Na-Osuke nailed her lifeless body and that of Kohei, a servant who had discovered too much, to adore.
Then dumped it into the river to simulate abandonment.
Weeks passed, and Iemon prepared to wed Ome.
On the night of the ceremony, the house glowed with lanterns and hushed laughter.
As Iemon and Ome matroned toward the bridal seat, a pregnant hush fell.
The candles extinguished. When the lights returned, Oiwa stood between them. A pale spectre in a white kimono, one eye drooped, patches of hair missing, nails blackened.
The crowd gasped. Mon froze. Ome clawed at Mon's arm, shrieking.
Then Oiwa glided closer.
Mon lashed out, his sword unsteady. An awful line broke as Ome and her grandfather collapsed, soaked in mortal wounds. Mon staggered back, staring at a horror that wore his wife's face. He fled with Nao scare, lanterns trembling to the ground. They passed empty stalls and silent corridors, until Rain Street night swallowed their tracks.
But Oiwa's voice hunted him in dreams. "Why did you betray me?" she cried,
her sob echoing in candlelit alleys.
In his temple refuge he saw her behind curtains. In cherry blossoms he heard her sigh. He could not escape.
Haunted and unhinged, he killed innocent men, sensing her in every shadow.
His own children's pleas chased him from his home. Driven mad, he fled between mountain passes, whispering his guilt into the wind. And then came vengeance.
Yomoshichi, Oiwa's younger brother, stern, unwavering, found him on a mist-wrapped path.
Steel shimmered beneath dripping leaves. In silence, one fatal stroke.
Mon collapsed, clutching at earth soaked with tears.
As his spirit dimmed, thunder cracked.
Some say Oiwa's ghost appeared overhead, lamenting,
and turned to mist.
In the years after, Oiwa's legend cast a spectral shadow across Edo.
Her image, white robe drifting, a single drooping eye, bald patches and wild hair, haunted stage, painting, and graveyard.
Kabuki took her own Ryo to terrifying extremes. Phantom hair uncoiling from lanterns, blood erupting at her mouth. Effects so chilling that actors still bow before her statue in Tokyo's Miyagi-oji to ward off her curse. Her story became both cautionary and cathartic.
Betrayal left in blood invites spirits that wounds cannot hold. Fathers spoke of loyalty in hushed tones. Wives offered prayers.
Even today, Oiwa's tale endures.
Her sorrow, rage, and spectral justice echoing in ukiyo-e prints and theater.
Reminding each listener that deeds, once undone, leave marks far deeper than flesh. And so Oiwa's spirit remains rooted in Japanese cultural memory.
Not just as rash vengeance, but as a haunting moral mirror. Ambition that tears at bonds. Betrayal that awakens revenge. And the spirits, still restless, who proclaim that every broken promise carries a weight even death cannot bear.
Story 11, Kintarō, Golden Boy. Rooted in Heian period folklore from the Ashigara and Oe mountains. Later preserved through kabuki, woodblock prints, and legends of the four guardian kings.
High in the misty heights of Mount Ashigara, where cedars tower like silent sentinels, and wildflowers carpet the understory,
a child was born to a noble woman who had fled from a world she no longer recognized.
Once the daughter of a samurai lord, she was caught in the crossfire of court intrigues. Shamed and hunted,
she exchanged silk robes for mountain moss,
retreating with her infant son into the deep forest.
Over time, villagers called her a Yama-uba, a mountain hag,
whispering that her face had grown wilder than deer, and her eyes deeper than cave pools. But the forest recognized her differently. It wrapped her in shade, sang lullabies through rustling leaves, and accepted her as kin. There, in a simple hut of pine bark and fern,
she dressed her son in a small red haragaki, emblazoned with the character kin, meaning gold.
His cheeks burned with health, even as he grew stronger than any mortal child. Wild hair fell around his face, and his laughter rang like bells through the pines.
Every creature of the forest came to know him. If a fox struggled to dig for grubs in hard soil, Kintarō dug gently beneath its paws.
When a raccoon slipped from a mossy log,
he reached down and lifted it safe.
Deer bowed low as he passed, titling their antlers in respect.
Monkeys beckoned him to join midday games atop tree branches,
while swans dipped their beaks in silent greeting. One spring afternoon, the stream that ran through a meadow, where rabbit families hopped,
became a torrent after heavy mountain rain.
A great cedar tree had tumbled across it, blocking the banks and stirring fear in small creatures that could not cross. The rabbits trembled. The fawns hesitated.
The young bear cub stood back, uncertain. Kintarō knelt and pressed his palm to the wet earth, listening.
With a deep breath, he hefted a sapling trunk over his shoulder and placed it atop the water. Bigger logs followed, 5 in total, creating a sturdy bridge. As the creatures gathered, he helped each one cross. They passed beneath his arms,
safe, relieved, connected in a single moment of mutual trust.
Unbeknownst to him, a group of men watched from the forest's edge.
Forces of the nearby province, drawn by rumors of a wild hero. Among them was Minamoto no Yorimitsu, a samurai commander famed for slaying demons and protecting Kyoto.
He dismounted silently. "Boy," he called.
Kintarō turned.
The animals scattered, but none ran far.
"Kintarō?" Yorimitsu said, kneeling so he'd be less imposing.
"I have heard of your deeds, of kindness and courage.
Will you come and serve as my retainer?"
Kintarō took a breath.
He looked to the nearby Yama-uba, his mother,
who stood among the tree trunks, watching him with a mother's anxiety and hope.
He bowed low. "Yes." Yorimitsu rose and turned back to the forest. "First, I must meet your mother." That evening, Yorimitsu found the mountain hut under a sky tangled with stars. The Yama-uba welcomed him, her eyes full of curiosity. She explained her exile, her vow to raise her child in peace. She handed Yorimitsu a bowl of steaming rice and recited gentle prayers to forest spirits.
Yorimitsu bowed deeply and honored her sacrifice, accepting both her and her son.
Before he left, he touched Kintaro's forehead.
Walk with honor and wisdom. From that day, he was called Sakata no Kintaki, and pledged himself to service in Kyoto, not as a nobleman, but as warrior with humility bred in forest wilds. In the capital, Kintaki was trained by swordsmen and scholars. He learned the art of the sword, the etiquette of court, the code of Bushido.
Despite his growing status, he never lost the forest's lessons.
Protect the weak. Listen to the land. Temper strength with tenderness. Stories of his feats multiplied. In one camp, when a furious river threatened a village downstream,
Kintaki led teams to reinforce banks with woven straw baskets and stockaded logs,
tools from his forest days.
They stood firm through torrential storms, saving farmland from flooding.
On battlefield fronts, he carried wounded soldiers on his back,
never faltering even under arrow fire. When a rampaging carriage of demons, called Oni, broke through a valley gate, he stood with Yorimitsu's warriors and faced them in a bloody clash.
Often, they fell back, but Kintaki never did.
His greatest battle came against Shutin Doji, a demon brewer who had enthralled mountain passes with poison wine and terror.
With Yorimitsu's band, he entered the demon's wooden fortress, every corridor dripping with menace, every room thick with ghosts of victims past.
At its center, Shutin Doji loomed, horned and monstrous.
But Kintaki did not yield.
He lunged with his axe, recalling his childhood stance before bears.
His strike cut through the demon's shoulder, breaking its grip on darkness.
The Oni roared, collapsed,
and Kintaki stood victorious, the axe red with demonic blood. When the demon fell, he knelt before Yorimitsu. May the forest's peace return to these valleys.
Years later, Kintarō brought his mother to live with him in Kyoto.
In a modest house lit by paper lanterns, they would sit together on quiet nights.
She would recount moonlit hunts for wild herbs, tales of guiding orphaned kits to their dens,
and lessons she learned from spirits in tree hollows. He would talk of armor polishing,
strategies learned by candlelight,
and the soft hush of wind between cedar trunks. They would drink tea slowly,
their bond bridging mountain solitude and city life. To this day, Kintaro's story is woven into Japan's cultural tapestry. On Kodomo-no-Hi, Children's Day, families fly koinobori, carp-shaped banners,
celebrating resilience and aspiration. In front of homes stand dolls of Golden Boy,
grain-fed cheeks, wooden axe, a small bear beside him. In kabuki and bunraku theaters,
actors recreate his feats with special effects.
Mountain storms, battle cries, giant bears moving across stage.
Woodblock artists depict him with axe in one hand, forest mist curling behind him. Parents whisper his name to sons, hoping they'll grow brave and kind. He is the emblem of strength without cruelty, leadership rooted in service, and grace born of humility.
So when you feel your own doubt or frailty,
Remember Kintarō, who carried mountains, wrestled demons, and still trusted deer to follow when he called.
May we all carry his golden heart into our own journeys. Story 12, The Mirror of Matsuyama. From the snowy Echigo region, modern Niigata, passed down through oral tradition and noted by collectors in the 19th and 20th century, including Ozaki and Mrs. T.H. James. In the quiet folds of Echigo's winter hills, snow lay thick upon bamboo groves and rice terraces,
bending their stalks beneath its weight. Beyond, tiled roofs were dusted like powdered silk, and wood-framed homes glowed with the soft light of paper lanterns at dusk.
Here lived a gentle samurai, his wife, and their daughter, a child whose laughter was said to sparkle like temple bells in springtime.
Their home was simple, tatami floors matted with rushes, sliding fusuma screens painted with cranes and pines,
and a small rock garden where moss cushioned each stone and iris would blossom when thaw finally came. Every evening, the samurai and his wife shared a bowl of sweet mochi tea,
while the child listened to the crackle of the hearth and watched snow spiral past the lattice windows. One winter morning, a messenger arrived by foot from Kyoto.
The samurai's brow tightened. He was needed at the imperial court. He returned home within an hour, tucked treasure in his coat, kissed his daughter's cold cheek, and spoke softly. "My little plum blossom, I must go to Kyoto. Be brave. When spring returns, I will come back, with gifts to delight you." He wrapped snow-white silk around her shoulders and vanished down the mountain path. The months stretched slowly, each day measured in lantern light and the chime of the temple bell. The wife taught the girl to fold origami cranes.
They walked past frozen ponds where carp were suspended in winter slumber.
They drank warm sweet sake and shared tales of the old country as lantern smoke curled overhead. Then, one spring evening, the samurai returned. He brought with him bolts of silk dyed like evening clouds, a painted doll whose kimono glowed in candlelight, and carefully wrapped in a black lacquered box, a smooth bronze mirror etched with pine branches and flying cranes.
The wife opened it, lifting the mirror gently.
"There is a woman here I do not recognize," she whispered.
The husband responded, "That is you, my love. It is called Kagami. It shows what stands before it." She studied the reflection, her hair swept back, her cheeks soft, her eyes kind,
and tears gathered in her voice. It is so unchanged, and yet so new.
The scrap of dusk settled gently in the room. They placed the mirror on the shelf beside hand-woven baskets of silk, and lullabies whispered to dust motes and kittens in the corner.
Seasons turned. Their daughter grew quiet and thoughtful.
But one spring, illness crept into the mother's body.
One evening, With soft lantern light dancing across the shoji screens, the mother murmured,
"Come here, my treasure."
The child sat close, resting an anxious hand on the wife's frail one. "Take the mirror," she said, placing it into the girl's hands. "Whenever your heart feels empty, and night is too quiet, look in this. I will be there."
The child swallowed, nodding. The hearth crackled until dawn, but by morning, the wife's breath had slipped away in silence. Grief fell like melted snow.
The father covered the body in white cloth and watched as it was carried away to the bamboo grove,
to be buried beneath plum blossoms later in spring. Those weeks passed slowly.
The samurai cleared rooms of his wife's scent.
Yet in the corner sat the mirror, covered with soft cloth.
The daughter would peer at it, fingertip trembling against the glass, recalling lullabies and her mother's scent of plum and tea. In time, the samurai remarried, a kind woman from a distant province.
She folded garments and arranged flowers in vases of blue and white.
She wore respectful robes but struggled to fill the silence left by the first wife. The daughter, ever quiet, kept to her corner, holding the mirror each night and facing the world in hushed conversations no one else understood.
The new wife watched with growing unease.
She rearranged the screens and moved the mirror beside the ancestral altar.
At what felt like too sacred a place. She said little but felt a stubborn ache in her heart, as though she stood outside a world she could not touch. One evening, she followed the daughter. The girl knelt before the mirror, fingers trembling against its surface, and spoke in a voice fragile as frost.
"Mother?
It is I miss you so." The stepmother flared with anger. She pulled the girl across the room.
"Enough. What are you doing with that mirror? Speak plainly."
Channeling the same calm she once followed her mother's voice with, the girl replied, "This mirror belonged to my mother. She gave it to me. She asked me to speak when the silence was too much. This gives me courage." The husband stepped in as walls closed around them. "Let me see it."
He lifted the cloth and gazed at the polished bronze.
In its surface, he saw insight.
The gentle smile he'd loved, the slender hand that had once guided his own.
It glowed softly with shared memories. He bowed low.
The wife, watching, felt tears carve warmth in her heart. She knelt also, offering a gentle apology.
The daughter sat between them, and together, they restored peace. From that day on, the mirror sat upon the altar, beside incense and the flowers of spring.
The daughter learned to weave with silk threads at her mother's old loom.
The stepmother began to fold cranes alongside her.
The samurai lit lanterns each evening and watched snow melt with them.
When the daughter grew and married, she carried the mirror with her.
On Children's Day, she would look into it across time and smile at her own daughter, lips just like her mother's.
Folklore murmured through the valley. That a mirror held not illusions, but the healing presence of those we loved.
That memory, when cherished, can become a hearthlight that never dims. Story 13. Uriko-hime, Princess Melon. Adapted from regional folktales collected across Japan, catalogued by folklorists like Kunio Yanagita and Hiroko Ikeda as Atu 408b, The Melon Princess and the False Bride. These versions preserve the core tale. A girl born from a melon, endowed with weaving skill, nearly married off before being replaced by an Amano-jaku yokai, and ultimately restored by the voice of a sparrow. In the shadowed valleys of a quiet mountain village, where mist cloaked the forest at dawn, and terraced rice paddies gleamed like mirrored jade, lived an elderly couple weighed by longing. The husband was a bamboo craftsman, his hands weathered from years of carving ladles and baskets. His wife arranged river stones into careful circles on their porch and whispered to the kamedana each morning, hoping for a child.
One dew-bright morning, the wife wandered to the clear mountain stream.
There, bobbing gently, lay a round green melon, its skin patterned like ripples in sand. She paused, breath held, and scooped it into her arms with wonder.
"A gift from the mountain spirits?" she murmured. Back at home, she and her husband sliced into the melon.
Inside, cushioned like a blossom, was an infant girl, her cheeks soft as mochi, her hair dark as ink. They named her Uriko-hime, Melon Princess, and vowed to raise her as their own. Uriko-hime grew like a spring lotus, graceful, rapid, radiant.
By the time she could walk, she wove delicate baskets.
By 7, she worked at a small loom, crafting cloth so fine it caught sunlight like dew. Morning after morning, she knelt beside her mother, tending silkworms and listening to tales of fox spirits and mountain kami.
At dusk, she wove threads dyed indigo and crimson, each bolt admired by neighbors as woven with quiet wisdom.
News reached a young provincial noble of her gentle spirit and artistry. Drawn by stories, he visited her by the riverside, where she washed cloth in the clear water. He arrived bringing plum cakes and soft-spoken praise of her skill. She greeted him with calm courtesy, bowing low, and he saw in her a heart that matched his own. Talk turned to marriage. The villagers prepared gifts of silk, incense, and symbolic rice hearts, awaiting the shrine ceremony that would bless their bond. On the eve of the presentation at the shrine, the old woman called Uriko-hime into the inner room, lantern light flickering against painted fusuma. "My dear," she whispered, tone steady, "tonight we walk to the temple and leave you safe here. But beware, there are spirits called Amano-jaku that mimic and deceive. If you hear a knock while you're alone, do not open. Promise?"
Uriko-hime nodded, heart steady with her mother's trust.
That night, the couple walked the stone path toward the temple, lantern swaying, insects singing their slow summer song. Inside the house, Uriko-hime hummed a lullaby and folded origami cranes on the tatami. The atmosphere was tranquil, too tranquil.
Then came a knock, slow, hesitant.
"Uriko-hime," came a soft voice. "May I come in?" She paused, voice calm. "I cannot." A second knock, louder now. "I've lost my shawl, please." Uriko-hime's heart stirred between caution and compassion. Against her better sense, she slid the door open just enough to peer out.
A dark figure lunged, twisted, green-gray, eyes slitted cold like obsidian.
It struck her down, her body falling silent, as the Amano-jaku began a sinister transformation.
In a grotesque ritual, It flayed her skin and donned it like a cloak.
Its voice echoed eerily as it practiced hers, smoothing the borrowed robe over its shoulders. When her elders returned at sunrise with incense and flowers, they found Uriko-hime standing at the threshold, pale but composed.
Her robe caught the morning light, her eyes were still.
Reunited, they guided her gently to the awaiting bridal palanquin. The prince, clad in white kimono, bowed as drums tapped softly behind bamboo gates.
But something lay subtly wrong. Her laugh was thin, her weaving hands idle.
Outside, guided by grief, a sparrow fluttered to the bamboo grove where Uriko-hime had fallen that night. It hovered, small body trembling in the dawn breeze, before circling the house and landing on the porch.
Inside, the false bride sat in silence. The sparrow alighted on her shoulder. In a piercing, human-like cry it shrieked. "Be warned, this is no princess.
No gentle heart lies beneath that robe." The prince stopped mid-step. He stared at the bride, eyes narrowing. Again, the sparrow cried, "The real Uriko-hime lies dead, while a deceiver wears her skin."
A hush swept the courtyard. The false bride's posture went slack. The borrowed skin tore.
The creature stood revealed, a snarling horror, clutching stolen hair. The prince drew his dagger, a ceremonial blade, and with one strike, felled the Amanojaku.
Its shriek echoed once, then fell.
In the aftermath, Uriko-hime's spirit shimmered near. A soft swirl of petals accompanied her return to form. Cheeks warmed, eyes opened, humanity restored.
The prince knelt. "You returned," he whispered. She touched his hand. "You never stopped seeing me." The shrine bells rang, marking a wedding reborn.
Beneath a red torii and a sky of drifting petals, the couple vowed vows of truth and unity. Offerings made, their union was blessed by kami and villagers alike. Uriko-hime wove again. Now her cloth was said to carry blessings of guardianship.
The elder couple folded cranes by their window. The sparrow, honored with a perch and millet, remained at the gate, its song a living reminder of truth. As the years passed, the tale of Princess Melon became legend. Children learned to avoid stray knocks at night, and to trust the sparrow's warning.
In some mountain homes, a delicate fabric, patterned with melon blossoms and woven with silver thread, still honors her legacy. Uriko-hime's story teaches that pure hearts, once true, may be stolen, but can always be reclaimed by trust, courage, and love.
Story 14, Banshōsai Aishiki, Okiku and the Plates. Edo period ghost story from the Banshō district of Old Tokyo, preserved in kabuki and oral tradition. The lanterns in Lord Aoyama's estate flickered like captive fireflies, illuminating the bamboo and pine that framed the entrance. The air smelled of incense and damp moss, woven with the distant murmur of the Sumida River. Within, Okiku moved with hush and grace. Her hands, delicate as spun silk, polished 10 cherished porcelain plates each dawn, each painted with cranes in mid-flight. With reverent breath, she counted aloud. 1, 2, 3. Her voice so soft it seemed part of the breeze. Aoyama watched her over the glint of the lacquer chest. At first, it was admiration for her devotion. The tilt of her head, the curve of her back, the precision of her count. But admiration has shadows. His gaze lingered too long. He found himself craving not just her service, but her devotion to him. Thoughts that began as admiration twisted into possessiveness. His whispered praises, sweet as plum wine, became demands. One evening, he approached her beneath lantern light. "Okiku," he said, voice low. "Your loyalty honors me. If you would be mine, truly mine, I would grant you station and comfort beyond most." Okiku froze, her brush hovering over a plate. She looked into his eyes once noble, now tinged with something raw. "My lord," she said, gently, "I serve with gratitude, but my heart belongs to no one." In that pause, something broke in him. His pride snapped. The next day, he orchestrated her undoing. Filled with his rage, he had one plate hidden, stolen behind closed doors. Soon, he feigned concern with a polished sorrow in his voice. "Okiku," he began softly, "one of the plates is missing. It is a disappointment to me, to us, an insult to the shogun's gift." Her heart plummeted. Over the coming days, each evening she counting until her voice wavered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Her breath caught. She searched, behind screens, beneath floorboards, even around incense burners warmed by red embers, but the 10th plate remained lost. Her knees scraped the tatami as she knelt, tears tracing pale lines on her face. Finally, he confronted her again, voice soft but steel-layered. "There is a way," he said, voice echoing through the silent hall. "Become mine, and all is forgiven." Okiku, voice trembling yet firm, whispered, "My lord, please. I cannot." His vision blurred with fury. He seized her by the arm and dragged her through ornate corridors to the estate's ancient well, moss-coated, moonlit. The garden was silent, save for the plume of incense smoke drifting upward. "Then you will repent," he snapped, and with one shove, he cast her into the dark well below. Her scream cut the night, a single shard of grief, then silence. He sealed the well with a wooden lid and retreated, an emperor dethroned by his own cruelty. That night, and for nights to come, a voice rose from the water, soft, relentless, haunted. "Ichi, ni, san, shi, go, roku, shichi, hachi, q. 9. And then silence. Not relief, but that tortured pause. Each syllable like a drop of cold water against his soul. Aoyama's nights became rituals of madness. He paced beside folded futon, clutching at screens, begging the darkness. "Please, come, finish." But the voice never said 10. It wept, grief-laden numbers trailing off. He called monks. They came with Heroku incense plates, sutras, and chants. They circled the well, lanterns swaying with trembling glow. Still, the only answer was the counting, raised softly, sorrowfully, through cracked screen and polished stone. One evening, driven to the edge of his humanity, Aoyama fell to his knees before the well, face etched with broken pride. "Okiku," he sobbed into the darkness, "why do you haunt me so? What must I do?" The air stilled. Rain paused mid-drop. And then, so clear it shattered him, came her voice. "Justice." A single word, echoing like a verdict. It looked shattered the brittle demon Aoyama had become. That night, he confessed, to the priests, to the villagers, and before the old shrine's dais. His voice trembled with regret, as he recounted all that had passed. He offered prayers, lit incense with shaking hands, and begged that Okiku's spirit find peace. The monks came quietly. Their robes swept across the moss-lined path like dust moving over stone. In their hands, they carried sutras and flickering lanterns. They gathered around the well, chanting softly as tendrils of incense curled skyward. That night, as the air thickened with memory, the voice rose again from the depths, soft, hollow, and sorrowful. Ichi, ni, san, shi, go, roku, shichi, hachi, kyu. A hush fell. And then, from among the monks, one stepped forward. With reverence and gentleness, he added a single word. Ju. The wind paused. The water in the well stilled. For the first time, silence brought peace instead of dread. No more counting. Only stillness. Some say that from that night onward, the voice was never heard again. Others whisper that if you walk alone by the well, especially during the humid twilight of midsummer, you might hear a soft breath on the wind, not of anguish, but remembrance. In the summer months, a small insect hovers near wells, its form delicate and shimmering, the Okiku Mushi. Villagers say it is her spirit, taking flight at last, lingering like the final note of a lullaby. As for Lord Aoyama, his fate is unknown. Some claim he left the estate and wandered the countryside in silence. Others say he returned often to the well, placing a porcelain plate beside it each year in quiet penance. But Okiku's story endured. In kabuki plays, she rises from behind stage wells with streaming hair and haunted eyes. In the Bancho district, lanterns flicker each autumn to honor her memory. She is not remembered as a monster, nor a vengeful ghost, but as a spirit who asked only for dignity, for justice, and to be counted.
Story 15, Kachi-kachi Yama, Firecrackle Mountain. An Edo period folktale from the foothills of Mount Fuji, woven through oral tradition, kabuki, and woodblock prints. In a tranquil valley not far from the mist-veiled slopes of Mount Fuji, where cedar trees rose like sentinels and dragonflies danced above the rippling rice paddies, there lived an elderly farmer and his gentle wife. Their home, made of weathered wood and thatched roof, sat nestled beneath wisteria vines. The air around them always smelled faintly of plum blossoms and wood smoke. Despite their modest means, they lived with contentment, sharing warm meals of miso soup and millet, tending to their garden, and watching the seasons turn with quiet joy. Each morning, the wife rose before sunrise to sweep the path with her bamboo broom, her sleeves tied back neatly, and each evening she lit an oil lantern before the household's small kamedana, a wooden altar to the kami spirits. She often left offerings of rice and pickled plum, praying softly for continued peace. To this humble household came a rabbit, slender and white, with alert ears and bright, intelligent eyes. It visited often, nibbling on cabbage leaves or resting in the herb garden, and the couple took it as a sign of fortune.
You bring us blessings, the wife would say, feeding it peeled carrots, and we are grateful. But not all creatures of the valley bore goodwill.
A tanuki, raccoon dog and trickster, began prowling the fields under moonlight. Clever and selfish, it trampled young shoots, tore through the barley stores, and gnawed at the baskets of daikon hung beneath the eaves. The farmer, after several sleepless nights, laid a snare near the bamboo grove.
By dawn, it had caught the culprit.
The tanuki thrashed and howled, its voice shrill with fear. The farmer raised his hoe, but his wife, heart heavy with kindness, stepped forward.
"Let him go," she whispered. "He is only hungry."
Moved by her mercy, the farmer untied the snare and set the tanuki free. The tanuki bowed low and smiled with narrowed eyes.
"I will not forget this." But his words were venom dressed as silk.
That very night, the tanuki returned, slipping past the shoji doors like a shadow. It chanted ancient words, its shape folding, cracking, stretching, until it wore the face of the old woman. Her scent, her voice, her warm hands, replicated in every detail.
It lured the farmer with gentle words and prepared supper. But what the rabbit would later discover, what the farmer could never forgive himself for, was this. The tanuki had not merely stolen her likeness. He had taken her life.
Somewhere in the darkness, in the hush between lantern shadows and moonlit stone, the tanuki had ambushed her, extinguishing her breath with callous cruelty. Her body was hidden among the tall reeds by the garden's edge, her last thoughts lightly resting on the face of the man she had loved for decades.
Only after the first sip of broth did the tanuki reveal the truth.
It threw aside the disguise, laughed cruelly, and vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a half-eaten meal and the truth like shattered porcelain on the tatami.
The farmer collapsed, stricken with horror. His cries pierced the stillness of night. The rabbit, who had seen the flickering spirit-like change as the woman passed, returned to find the farmer seated motionless in the garden, hands trembling, heart torn open. "She was kindness itself," he said in broken whispers. "And I set her killer free." The rabbit placed a paw gently on the farmer's knee. "There is a justice born of compassion. I will see it done."
That morning, beneath the canopy of cedar and cloud, the rabbit made a vow, not of revenge, but of restoration. It found the tanuki gathering firewood near a stream, whistling tunelessly. The rabbit joined him, cheerful and chatty, stacking bundles and praising the view of Mount Fuji in the distance.
When the tanuki wasn't watching, the rabbit replaced one bundle with dry, crackling sticks soaked in pine resin. As they walked, the rabbit lit the twigs with a tiny coal tucked in a split bamboo tube.
Soon came the sound, kachi-kachi, a crackle that echoed like mocking laughter.
"What is that noise?"
asked the tanuki, ears twitching.
The rabbit smiled serenely.
"Just the sound of Kachi-kachi Yama," it said.
"The mountain speaks when wrongs must be burned clean." The flames caught.
The tanuki howled, rolling to extinguish the fire, and hurled himself into the stream.
Smoke rose from his back. His eyes were wild, furious. The rabbit returned the next day with a pouch of crushed red pepper and herbs. "You," growled the tanuki. "Mocking me?"
But the rabbit gently applied the medicine, knowing even justice must carry care. A week later, beside the great lake that mirrored Mount Fuji's snowy crown, the rabbit met the tanuki once more. The air smelled of sakura blossoms and cedar sap.
The tanuki proposed a race across the water. Each would carve a boat, and the fastest would win. The rabbit agreed. He carved his from solid cedar and rubbed it with pine oil.
The tanuki, arrogant still, shaped his from clay, not knowing it would dissolve.
They launched at dawn. For a while, both boats glided evenly, but as the sun rose, the clay boat softened. Water lapped in.
The tanuki cursed and paddled wildly, but his craft began to crumble. The rabbit, floating nearby, watched with sad eyes.
"You brought this," he said quietly. "You scorned mercy and defiled kindness."
The tanuki howled, "Spare me."
But the rabbit knew what was owed.
He struck once with his oar, swift, clean, and the tanuki vanished beneath the surface, swallowed by the mountain-fed waters.
The rabbit returned alone.
He bowed before the shrine in the old couple's garden, leaving behind the herbs he once used for healing. The farmer, aged and sorrowful, greeted him.
"It is done?" The rabbit nodded. "Her spirit can rest." That spring, the mountain winds felt gentler. The rice grew tall and green, untroubled. The rabbit remained, visiting the garden, watching over the house.
To this day, in the villages beneath Mount Fuji, the tale of Kachi-kachi Yama is told when flames crackle and rabbits dart through brush.
It is said the mountain still speaks when injustice rises, and the rabbit still listens.
At shrines, children whisper prayers to a carved rabbit, and elders leave small bundles of firewood or cedar branches, their silence a vow.
To honor kindness, to remember cruelty, and to act when the fire must be lit. Story 16, The Wife from the Dragon Palace.
From Kagoshima's coastal folk traditions, as recorded by Kunio Yanagita in his collection of fisherfolk legends. On a rocky shore lapped by foaming tides under a sky painted in dawn's lavender,
lived a poor flower gatherer and his elderly mother.
Each dawn he waded into the surf, gathering blooms, camellias, sea lavender, and crab-apple blossoms, to weave into garlands for sale.
His world was small but honest, and he carried his meager earnings home, leaving a single blossom at the wooden kamedana in gratitude.
One day, when the sea offered him few flowers, he tossed a humble garland into the surf as a prayer to Ryujin, the sea dragon god. The ocean stilled. A tortoise surfaced, long-necked and calm, its shell patterned like rippling waves.
It spoke with soft authority. "Helper of humble hearts, come with me." And it dove under the waves, the man following, carried in a current of light beneath the surface.
When they reached Yubu-jo, the legendary dragon palace, the hall gleamed with mother of pearl, its pillars carved like spiraling coral. Courtiers in fish-scale robes bowed deeply. At the throne, a woman rose, Uriko-hime, the Dragon King's daughter. Her hair was the color of midnight sea, her eyes gentle pools of moonlight. She spoke with a voice like echoing shells. "You are welcome here, kind friend."
The tortoise whispered, "Ask for her hand." He did.
In 3 days and 3 nights, they fell in love, his earnest simplicity and her gentle power intertwining like seaweed and current. When it was time to return, Uriko-hime embraced him, pressed a strand of her pearl-white hair into his hand, and whispered,
"Our time may be brief, but it is true." They emerged on the shore as dusk settled. Only months had passed, though the song of their hearts felt like lifetimes. Back home, the flower gatherer found his mother frail and still. Fear lodged in his heart.
Uriko-hime knelt by the altar and laid her hands on the woman.
A silver mist rose. The mother drew breath, her cheeks pinkened, her eyes opened in wonder.
She wept, clasping Uriko-hime's hands in gratitude. Uriko-hime then struck the dirt with a polished mallet, and a modest house rose there, a home for 3, carved of cedar and lit by lanterns.
Peace bloomed in their days.
The flower gatherer wrapped Uriko-hime's arm in silken cloth. She tended the garden, and the mother wove robes dyed with indigo night. Together, they ate rice sweetened with cherry blossoms, and every evening the sea breeze carried calm lullabies across the threshold.
But shadow grew beyond the garden walls.
A local samurai, Adachi no Hayato, heard rumors of a radiant woman living with the poor man.
Greed and envy coiled in his chest like vipers. He wrote a letter in flowing hand, heavy with polite threat.
"Bring me 100 koku of rice, or forfeit your wife." The husband stood before Uriko-hime, voice trembling.
She touched his cheek and told him not to fear.
She walked to the shore, and summoned horses, hundreds of them, backed by tidal waves and white foam. They bore grain ripe and sparkling, filling Adachi's granaries overnight.
Hayato's letter arrived again. "Now bring me 1,000 fathoms of rope, or she goes to me."
Uriko-hime smiled softly. She went again to the sea, and the waves rolled forth rope woven of kelp, strong as woven steel. It unfurled across the sands, coiling golden green across rock pools.
The samurai dared not speak.
His next demand: he would visit, accompanied by 600 men, and he wanted 77 jars of sake, and entertainments fit for a court. Uriko-hime responded with grace.
In a swirl of perfumed air and dancing lantern light, food and sake appeared, steaming in lacquered trays.
Then, from an enchanted casket, emerged flutes and drums, and dancers carved of water and light, swirling, chanting, and evoking distant crane flights at dawn.
Hayato, overwhelmed and broken, left without complaint.
Word spread through nearby villages. A magical wife from the sea was a gift of compassion and loyalty, not a trophy of conquest.
but not all was eternal.
Beneath the sea, Otohime heard the faint calling of Ryujin, his voice echoing in tide and twilight.
She explained to her husband, "My father's sea cannot wait.
I belong to the depths, but those I love belong here." On a night when moonlight danced on closed shutters and lantern oil fell to embers, Otohime took his hand.
"I return, yet our love is true. Live in kindness always, and you will carry us both." At dawn, he awoke to find the casket of her belongings by the shore, a box of mother of pearl, and a vial shimmering with the sea's music. He touched the hairpin she had worn, still cool with ocean mist. The tide curled in a final farewell, and she was gone.
His tears carved small valleys through the sand as he carried her gifts home. He planted her hairpin in his garden, where a cherry tree grew in a single night, soft pink petals drifting at dawn. At the flower gatherer's modest grave, villagers placed blossoms.
They told his children he had loved far more than any man, and in that love, had never lost.
Today, fishermen along Kyushu's coast speak of Otohime when storms are gentle. They pray at small shrines by coves, offering pearls or seaweed, whispering,
"To kindness, to courage, to hearts that treasure love above envy."
Woodblock prints from the late Edo period show the scene. Otohime and her husband side by side, beneath waves faintly drawn around them, one a princess of the palace below, the other forever her brave companion. In some homes, the hairpin of mother of pearl rests in a bowl of salt, a reminder that love can cross realms, but only when rooted in humility, compassion, and truth.
And so, dear dreamer, the lanterns dim, and the wind through the pines grows still. From moonlit wells and mountain groves, from shape-shifting beasts to rabbit guardians, we have wandered gently through the timeless legends of Japan.
These tales, once spoken by firelight and remembered in silken thread, hold more than wonder. They carry reverence, sorrow, joy, and quiet strength. If your eyes grow heavy, may your dreams drift among cherry blossoms and temple bells.
If you listen while you study, may the rhythm of voice and story hold you steady, like stones in a stream.
Thank you for sharing this time with Whispered Legends. If these stories brought you peace, consider subscribing, or leave a kind word below.
More stories are already on their way, carried by moonlight and memory. Until then, may your night be serene, and your heart at ease.